With no further business, we will adjourn that meeting at 3:04 p.m. We will now call the meeting of the Waco City Council on March 21st, 2023 to order at 3:04 p.m. Please join me for a moment of silence. Thank you. In opening our meeting today, I did want to note that Councilmember Holmes is wearing blue in honor of Creighton University, which defeated the Bears.
Too soon. Too soon.
Maybe.
But it's his alma mater, so as he should be.
I did send 2 kids and several hundreds of thousands of dollars to Baylor. So I feel like there's some atonement here.
Balanced, yeah. We provide an opportunity for the public to address the city council on any agenda item or during the hearing of visitors portion of the agenda. On items other than public hearings, speakers will be allotted 1 3-minute presentation regardless of the number of agenda items the speaker wishes to address. If you're here to speak and have not filled out a registration card, please see the city secretary staff at the registration table outside of the auditorium to provide registration information so that staff can contact you if necessary. If you have handouts, please let us know at the beginning of your presentation and staff will distribute those to council. And if you're unable to approach the podium due to physical limitations, a microphone is available to be brought to you. Is there anyone present who would like to speak on a work session agenda item? If not, then we will move to the first, we will recess the regular session and convene to work session with a report from our city manager.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. Good afternoon to you as well to the public in attendance. We've got a really informative work session today, a lot of great presentations, but I wanted to start today with a couple of recognition of employees. The first is, well, it's the retirement of Johnny Binder, and I'm going to try and get through this without choking up Johnny. Thanks a lot. But if you don't know Johnny Binder, you must have never been to the Cameron Park Zoo, because he spent 45 years of service on behalf of the city of Waco and even a few more volunteering before we started paying him. He told me earlier he started volunteering at the age of 10 at the Cameron Park Zoo, and it wasn't at his current location. It was at the airport zoo. Johnny started working for the city in 1978 as a general curator. And I've had the privilege of promoting Johnny at least twice, most recently earlier this year to director of the zoo. Really thankful for Johnny's dedicated work at the zoo. His work on education across the globe and conservation across the globe has been written about in all sorts of journals and publications. He's even written a chapter on zoo design, I think in China. Is that right? If I remember right? I think you can look at a leader and get to know a lot about them by the type of people that show up to a recognition like this. And we have all sorts of staff here in the back of the room from Cameron Park Zoo. We've got Johnny's friends and family here as well that are wishing him well wishes as he launches into retirement. And I think that says a lot about his character and who he is. Council, you can imagine in 45 years, Johnny has pretty much touched every part of that zoo. Since it's been at its current location since '93. He's also served us a number of times in achieving AZA accreditation, which is critical to our zoo, including the most recent successful accreditation last year. I think it's safe to say that we at the City of Waco and the Cameron Park Zoo will not soon forget Johnny's impact that he's had. So Mayor and Council, I'd love to give him a hearty thank you.
Johnny, I've often said one of the favorite places for my family to go and my kids in this whole area is the zoo. And so I'm just so incredibly thankful for your dedication to building out this real gem in our community. And the legacy that you leave behind in this career is remarkable. because there's generations of kids who have grown up loving this zoo, and there will be generations of children that will grow up loving this zoo in the years ahead. And so I'm thankful for that dedicated work because it's a special place for families to be. You think about all the memories that are made there and the warmth that comes from a place like that. And it's critical for our community to have something like this. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate your selfless sacrifice for our community in this amazing space.
Thank you very much. It's been my honor and my privilege.
Sir.
Mayor and council, I do want to note, because everybody's wondering, in 10 days when Johnny goes into retirement, they're curious who's going to be working the day-to-day at the zoo while we do a national search for Johnny's replacement, and that'll be Dwayne Hills. Dwayne, I recently introduced Dwayne to y'all, but Dwayne, do you mind standing up and introducing yourself again? Give us a wave. Dwayne's will serve as our interim zoo director during that search process, so looking forward to that as well. Mayor and council wanted to provide an additional recognition and gratitude to the city staff members who supported the mayor's conference with faith leaders last week. And that was well covered by the Waco Tribune, and if you didn't hear about it, you can go back and read that article. They did a great job of summarizing the event. But I specifically wanted to highlight the work of Deidre Emerson, our deputy city manager, Michelle Hicks, city secretary, and Monica Settlemeyer, and our communications and marketing team. They worked really diligently to organize this event, and I think it went off really well. Very professionally done, and definitely want to send an extra thank you to Deidre for standing in for me on facilitating the session that I was not able to get to. But if you don't mind giving them a round of applause as well.
I'll just jump in again. This is something that I think is really an amazing opportunity to bring information to a key group of stakeholders. We had about 340 faith leaders from a variety of denominations and communities represented that got to hear so much about what's going on in this community. And it was in a beautiful room that was inviting and welcoming. And I've heard incredible feedback from those congregation leaders about how important it was for them to hear about the resources available in this community for their congregants, as well as the way that they can serve this community better just by having access to information. So a great team of city staff members gave presentations. Thank you to all of you who did that. Other staff members at resource tables in the back where information could be distributed. And again, the dream team of Michelle, Monica, and Deidre, thank you so much. I really think there's going to be significant fruit that comes from bringing information to these gatekeepers and stakeholders in our community. And that's something that I think this council is committed to, is really making sure that our community is informed of where we can go and through collaboration seeing better outcomes. And it was a great event to see that goal realized.
Thanks, Mayor. On today's agenda, we do have 3 informal reports. The first is another update on Trendwood apartment renovations. The second is an update on the work of the downtown Waco community visioning sessions. And lastly is an IR on emergency water planning efforts, which is the only one I'll highlight today is IR 160. I think it's really important, and I know our utilities director, Lisa Tyre, is really elevating the message, as well as Monica, that we are still in a drought. It has been raining a little bit, but we are still 11 feet low at the lake, which is not the way you want to start the season. So the IR documents and talks about how we are working towards accessing our water rights in the Brazos River, which I think is going to be pivotal if we continue in a drought through the summer, as we continue to see that lake level decline. Mayor and council, we have 5 public hearings.
Can I just chime in?
Of course, please.
The informal report, and I appreciate you highlighting the one on emergency water planning efforts. And for those that have the package, it's on page 20. Some interesting reading on prioritizing conservation. You point out 3 things: conservation, mobilizing other water rights, and water reuse. And I think that's, as the drought, and everybody understands the lake level. And I think on the first one, conservation, I think we're getting good community buy-in, at least anecdotally. People understand that we're in a drought here, and conservation measures, will be implemented, and they're already in stages, and the little write-up shows that we're anticipating April, May for another stage. What is it? Whatever the next stage is.
Three,
But
it'd be three.
it makes a difference. The conservation part, people may think, well, I'm only watering it twice a week instead of 3 times, or once instead of twice. It makes a difference, and that is just the easiest thing we can do is the conservation. But mobilizing other water rights, I really appreciate the 2 initiatives you pointed out with the Lake Brazos upstream and Lake Brazos kind of downstream, I'll say, or near stream, on what we can do there. Would like a little more information on that one, cost-wise, and kind of what we're talking about, but I'll follow up with you on that. And then the water reuse, effluent, and just getting that into the community conversation too, how we can reuse water and not send it all downstream. That conversation and that analysis is going to get more and more front and center. In addition to this little study here, which again is great reading on page 20 and 21, I think the last 7 or 8 or 10 of our resolutions today are water related, and repairing our current systems and upgrading what we had in our budget, but getting that fixed and getting it implemented as quickly as we can. So I just want to point out that I appreciate staff staying on top of this. We all hope it starts raining and doesn't end for a while, but these are measures that we need to, even though these are kind of the easy fixes, they're still expensive and they're time consuming. But the fact that we're getting them on the front burner, I think, is important. So appreciate it.
Well stated. We have 5 public hearings on the agenda today, council. Public hearing 172 will be handled by Galen Price later on. It deals with receiving citizen input on the draft home ARP allocation plan, and then Clint Peters will cover 4 public hearings, perhaps during the work session later if we have time. If not, it'll be during the business session. I wanted to take a short diversion on public hearing 175, which considers an ordinance designating the Jockey Club, Barber, and Beauty Shop as a historic landmark. This business was the first black-owned barbershop in Waco at its original location. They were among the first 9 businesses approved by council in December 2022 under the We All Win program. If you read some of the background information in the agenda packet, it talks about when they moved from one side of the river to the other, and that process, and how they only had about $2,500 to make that move when that happened. And I was just, somewhat proud of the council for what it did just recently under the We All Win program for the Jockey Club. Actually approved $56,000 between our ARPA funds and TIF facade grant to improve their current location. And so kind of full circle here on what happened a long time ago and what the energy and activity level is for this council to support small businesses. So definitely proud of that item and wanted to highlight that for you.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I'll follow up on that too. Great reading, in starting on page 179, going all the way through 220-ish, on the history of the Jockey Club. And actually, JB, you're here today, right? One of them is written by JB Smith in the Waco Trib. Great article, but good history, and I'm glad that we're recognizing the historical landmarks and the important parts in Waco, and well deserved, and it's a great business.
Thank you, Bradley, for identifying one of the jewels of District 1, and especially East Waco. Folks know history, Jockey Club and beauty shops were the country club and black community when that was not allowed to be a thing. And no matter what you did, you had an opportunity to go and become your best, get your grooming on, get your hair cut, get a good shave, and the world would see the man you are if you're talking about a barbershop, or the woman that you are if you're talking about a beauty shop or a hair salon. And that this business has been in Waco since 1916. sitting in space in the original Bridge Street Plaza, on the other side of the river, meant something to so many people. And the beauty in it is it still does today. And so, you know, just like I know men and deacons and my daddy and who sat in those chairs, you know, my sons have sat in those chairs. And so it's full circle for how we keep generations moving, but culture is still rich and still true. So the only part I hate in my job is that I was not, because we're trying to work with THC, Texas Historical Commission, because there was a break in time when Mr. Dugas died and where the business wasn't active. I can't give them or recommend them for a Texas Treasurers Award because it has to be continuous business, but we're trying to put a little asterisk there because they really deserve to be identified as a Texas treasurer. And I'm glad that we have the ability to recognize and honor them for the jewels that they are.
Well done. We do have 45 resolutions on the agenda today, and obviously represent a substantial amount of work on behalf of your city staff. I'll just note, there are a couple of ratifications on resolutions. One in particular is our TAG grant, Texas Anti-Gang Grant application. We did submit that as a resolution today, Resolution 201, because the deadline to apply for those funds happened during the window of time that we had canceled the March 7th council meeting. And so we have applied for those funds to continue our involvement in the Texas Anti-Gang Program, and wanted to note that for the council. On ordinances, we have ordinances 177, which is emergency reading to authorize the election of an unopposed candidate for the position of Council District 5 and canceling the election for that district. That's for you, Councilmember Holmes.
Thank you.
And there's one additional ordinance on second reading today. So Mayor and Council, that concludes my report, and we'll take any questions that you might have for me.
City Manager Ford, I want to, and I may say more at the business session, but thank you for canceling the election for Councilmember Holmes. I feel like he's earned an uncontested spot up here, but that's neither here nor there. But I wanted to mention Resolutions 2023-207, excited about Walker Partners taking on professional surveying and civil engineering services, including final design, bidding services, construction administration, and resident project representative services for the Chapel Road Widening Improvements Project that's in this year's fiscal budget, budget. I'm excited about that. I think bringing curb and gutter, widening that road, sidewalks, given that there's a new elementary school there with Chapel Park Elementary, and just given the amount of development happening along Chapel and adjacent to Chapel, I think that's going to be a big win for West Waco. So I wanted to say that, and also wanted to give a kudos too on the contract for preliminary engineering services with BGE for a potential West Warren Street improvements down the road, which is another county road looking but much higher capacity road that's in need of a similar type of widening. So grateful for the city moving forward on both of those roadways.
Very good. The consent agenda includes resolutions 2023-178 through 2020. Are there any items council would like to remove from the consent agenda?
No.
If not, the consent agenda will include resolutions 2023-178 through 220, except for 191 and 206, because Councilmember Borderoot has filed affidavits of substantial interest on each of these items. With that, I will turn it over to Bradley for the first work session.
Thanks, Mayor. Our first work session is, I'm going to invite Monica Settlemeyer and the team from Loyal Casper to the front table. They're going to give a discussion of the City of Waco branding project and talk about proposed phases and timelines. So, Monica,
Great.
would you mind introducing the whole team?
Absolutely will.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Monica Settlemeyer, Director of Communications and Marketing. I have with me Anna, who from Loyal Caspar, and we actually have two members also of the team, both Scott and Christina, who will be joining us throughout this presentation as well today. We have the distinct pleasure to talk to you about the City of Waco branding project that we are bringing to you today. There we go. Okay. So one of the City Council's initiatives is to articulate the city's identity using both ways that reflect our city's rich history and our diverse community. while also highlighting our growing economy in order to guide our vision for the future. The city as an organization has a wide variety of audiences. The objective for this project is to create the framework to help design and identify inclusive and diverse content for our residents, visitors, businesses, and more. The city put together a diverse group to review the submitted proposals. Members of the review committee included myself and members of my team, Economic Development, Parks and Rec, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and our city manager's office. So what are our intended outcomes for this project? First, we're seeking to conduct research both internally and externally with stakeholders. This will allow us to define our identity to ensure that it accurately represents and communicates who we are. We'll conduct an audit of our current branding elements. While I may be biased, I really think we do great work individually as a community. So how do we take that work and create the foundation for the city as a whole to speak with a more collective voice? We'll develop positioning and messaging statements that will include CVB, economic development, and other city services. We'll create recommendations for essential visual, verbal, and tactical elements to include brand positioning, taglines, and guidelines, and create and deliver a cohesive and detailed brand identity strategy. So Loyal Caspar is a creative branding agency with an amazing background in working alongside organizations to do this work. You will see later in your agenda packet a resolution where we are recommending them to complete this project. I'm excited to have them here today to discuss how they will do the work. And so with your approval, Anna, I will have you move forward.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks for having us here today. Just tell you a little bit about us. As Monica mentioned, we're a creative branding agency. And we've worked with a pretty broad range of clients, from museums and universities to tech companies, and we've done a lot of work in entertainment. We hope to bring our expertise working with all these different brands to our project here. And when you work with us, you'll also be working with our strategic partner, a company called Versive, and Christina Summerfield is here to speak a little bit, so we'll kind of be going back and forth a bit, so you can meet her as well. Christina.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, Christina here, executive strategist and owner of Versive, and longtime partner of Loyal Caspar. I've had the pleasure of running strategy businesses for the last 25 years. And at Versive, we work across a diverse set of verticals, including big tech, healthcare, finance, clean energy, lifestyle, retail, and media, to name a few.
So just to speak a little bit about our agency, we like to say, we think like an agency, design like a studio, and create like a production company, just to make the distinction that we do the strategic work and the research, but we also like to have a really seamless transition into the creative that speaks to the people, to everyone that hears it. So we really try to have an integrated process. We launch, reinvent, and strengthen brands. So we'll come in from the beginning of a brand to in the middle if you just need a little refresh, and really try to work with you to figure out how you want to express who you are. This is just an image of some of the people working on this. Christina, there's me, and Scott, who's our executive producer. David and Beat are the founders of the company. And then Shannon is our producer who will be working on the project. And Kate Burgess is a creative strategist at Versive, who we've worked with a fair amount as well. So speaking about strategy, I'm going to kick back to Christina for a moment.
Absolutely. So for us, whenever we start any of these engagements, we really know that strategic approach and getting those insights is really foundational for success. And if we look at, how we work, it's really about uncovering what are the true brand and business needs, and really kind of uncovering the opportunities to meet those needs. And so a little bit about how we work, we really rely on insights over assumptions, again, doing that rigorous research, leaving room for experimentation and exploration, strategy working really closely with creative and our client teams to really make sure that we're pushing all the possibilities, and of course building consensus along the way. Especially in projects like these, there are a lot of stakeholders we know that need to be informed through the process. And so really the strategic approach, again, that discovery, that research phase, insight phase, really becomes foundational for the rest of the work that we do. So if you can make it as scientific as you like, but that really is the set of data points by which we measure the success of all of how we bring the brand to life later on. And so this list is just a quick list of the types of strategic work that we do, all the way from designing bespoke research approaches and deploying that research through to creating strategy, naming, positioning, all the way through to rollout and analytics.
So just to speak about creative strategy, once we've done our research and started to think about our strategy, we want to get into the creative, expressive part of that, and it's generally not a straight line how that works. It's more like a little bit of overlap, so we'll start to learn about you and start to articulate that strategy, and at the same time, we'll be starting to think through creative. So if I'm working on the creative part of it, I'm also part of the strategy so that I can really make sure there's an integrated approach to all of the work we do. So thinking and creating, just, reiterating that we're always, thinking and creating at the same time to make sure that all the things we make at the end really speaks to the things that we're hearing from you at the beginning. And we're looking forward to a collaboration with you, and we think it'll be a really exciting experience for us. So just to get into some of the details of our proposal, this is our timeline. I'll let Christina speak through the beginning of this, like where the work falls into this calendar.
Sure. As I mentioned, the beginning of the work really is a preparatory phase. So like we said, insights over assumptions, we take a few weeks to really work closely with the city team in order to understand what are the research streams that need to be conducted, who are the key stakeholders that we need to reach out to. So we spend some time preparing for that, and then really spend the next sort of 6 weeks really diving into that research, including coming out to the city and spending, ideally, we were hoping to come in early May to attend some events, meet some important stakeholders, and spend some time experiencing the city firsthand as our team. And that will allow us the information to start formulating the brand strategy. Again, those foundational components about how we position the brand and how we set the rest of the work up.
And then after we get through working on the strategic component, we start to get into voice and messaging, identity, DNA. So what that includes is really thinking through some of the building blocks of the brand, your logo, how we would use the flying W, how that works across different touch points, how we use color and type. So those are all sort of those core elements. And then with voice and messaging, it's both a tagline, but also just any kind of messaging and giving you kind of a guidance for the future for how you can speak about the city in various ways. And then we roll that out through the identity, and then ultimately provide you with a style guide and an implementation strategy that can help you have all the tools you need in one sort of big brand Bible that can allow you to run with the work that we've done. And then this just is sort of a longer list of deliverables. It's really a lot to look at, but essentially what we've been talking about, listing it all out in detail. And then this is just our motto, I think creatively and create thoughtfully.
Great. Yeah, and with that, we will open up to any questions that you might have for us.
Go ahead, Josh.
I'll jump in. Do you mind putting it back on the deliverables
Yep.
page? But
It doesn't want to go back. Maybe if you scroll.
And while you're getting there, I think one thing, I'll have some comments at the end, but I think this will be a great intro because one of the things that I've heard is people have expressed, has heard about this, and our council's been talking about going through this exercise for some time. Just to clear the air, the Flying W will maintain as a part of the design book. No one's planning to get rid of that. That will be incorporated into the strategy and the plan. That is something that we hold tightly and dearly as our local logo. And in the same way that Baylor, as an example, has maintained the interlocking BU or the Sailor Bear over years, but also gone through continual process of determining what their identity is, we can do the same thing.
I fully second that reassurance to the public, and that the Flying W, I'm not a marketing expert, but when something is commonly tattooed on your residents' bodies, it's probably a pretty effective logo. So just having seen a lot of that in permanent ink, and having so many people comment positively on it, I'm excited that we are keeping that at the centerpiece of our brand. But also, I will say, to the mayor's point about Baylor University going through a process like that recently, that's my employer, and at first I kind of bristled at that, I'll admit that, But now seeing the wisdom and value of having, even down to the color palette, I think that's really served the university in going through this process, in having consistent kind of brand guidelines and an overall umbrella to tie in all the various platforms and departments and messaging, so that they're all essentially on the same page, or at least kind of rowing in the same direction. So I definitely do feel like this is something that we will benefit from. And I would also ask our consultant here if you would also look at kind of our more traditional symbolism, as well as branding such as flag, seal, and coat of arms in looking at this. I think this might be a time to just kind of look at that through new eyes and with the consistency of this approach. So thank you both for this presentation, and looking forward to seeing your work product.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm super excited because brand is my whole jam. And what I'm most excited about is that this opportunity for the city of Waco to look at who it is, who it all is, and come up with something that is reflective of its community in its entirety. I expect that in the community engagements, all of our communities will be represented, all of our racial demographics, our gender demographics, our communities from our elders to our babies, because they are a part of Waco. And I believe that their voice is important in truly defining this iteration of who we are. That's the one thing about growing. You will not be the same forever. You shouldn't be. If nothing changes, nothing changes. But we hold fast to what the Waco is that we want it to be, and what we see reflective in the eyes of our babies and our elders. So this is the most exciting part. I mean, then when we get to color and Pantones and all that, then that's just really my jam. But I'm excited about this, and I look forward to walking this lockstep with you all in this, and making sure that all the people who you need to hear from are who you hear from. Because, you're not from here, and you might not know immediately who to go to, but I know that I've seen some exercises in the past where I'm like, okay, this is but one percentage or part of our community, and this one person can't reflect us all. So, that's something that I look forward to seeing done, and done well.
Holmes over here, I agree with everything Andrea or Councilmember Bearfield just said. We've been discussing this, as Mayor said, for a number of years. And it looks like we've got a good partner here with Loyal Casper in taking us to get formation to what we're talking about on branding, which agree with, again, Councilmember Bearfield, how important this is. Branding, identity, consistency in the messaging. It'll have ultimately a positive impact on what we're trying to do with Waco. So I appreciate that. You've got, and what you put in the scope here, great. Develop positioning and messaging statements, articulate brand guidelines, create brand identity strategy. And as Councilmember Borders also said, all the deliverables here. I mean, it gives us something to, oftentimes marketing can kind of get fluffy and you don't know what you have. I think come August and September, when we get the final, some of the discussion going here, we'll have things to look at. Here's where we are. So I appreciate the Gantt chart here also is excellent. And looking forward to working with y'all, because again, the ones of us that have been on council for a while, we've been kind of talking about how we get our messaging consistent, because even within the city, we have a couple of different, 2 or 3 kind of different brands that we use, and I just like the idea of having the one. Ed Baylor is a great example for everybody. They just went through this, 2 or 3 years ago. So whatever we need to do to help you along on this is great. One quick question, some Versiv and some Loyal Casper, what's the relationship there?
Well, Versiv is more focused on some of the earlier stages of research and strategy, whereas Loyal Casper will be more focused on the creative end. However, I'll be part of the whole process, so I do work through the strategy as well, and how that gets articulated. And one reason for that is we don't want it to be this sort of separated process. It needs to be integrated so that everything really comes together. I don't know, Christina, if you have anything to add to that, but.
Well, I think that that's right. I mean, my team's expertise is really the strategic piece and going out and conducting that research. But we absolutely do include the design team as well. It's a very collaborative process, and as Anna mentioned, we've done this more than a few times together. So yes, very very well versed at keeping to our wheelhouses and our areas of expertise.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Anna. Appreciate it.
Thanks for this
Thank you.
report. I'm excited about the Flying W and keeping it in front of us. At one point in time in my tenure here at the city council, we had the sort of a Texas Ranger badge. And every time I went to a conference or a meeting, I'd have a line of folks wanting the Texas Ranger badge. And I had to tell them it's not a Texas Ranger badge, it's a City of Waco badge. But the Flying W, I think, I really like that Flying W, and I'm glad you're going to work with us on that, and you're going to explore other ways to bring it forward. So thank you for that. Thank you for this presentation as well.
I'll just end and say I think that, I share what's been said. This has been something we've been excited about exploring a long time. Thank you, Monica, for getting us to this point. Your team is so excellent and provides such quality work. I'm really excited for them having a tool to really allow them to continue to produce such quality work. I think that identity is so critical as individuals and as institutions and as communities. And I'm most excited about this because I think if you polled Wacoans on what the identity of this city is, you would probably hear really similar things. There's going to be some diversity in that, but I believe that there are themes that will jump out really easily. But by putting words to it, our citizens are going to be the first and foremost beneficiaries of this because we'll be able to carry who we are in unison as we move forward. I think that agreed with what Councilmember Barefield said on pulling in a variety of stakeholders and community members, and also just exploring from each of them where we're going to go with this. But I think we've got the right team. This is going to be a great product, and I'm really thankful that you're in Waco today, and look forward to getting Christina and Scott in Waco as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
And at some point, we
Thank
need
you
to
all.
talk about the fact that this man is named Beat.
I'm sorry.
Beat. Your partner, Beat. I was
Oh,
like,
Bayat.
that's got a story, and I really want to hear that.
It's pronounced Bea.
It's pronounced what?
Swiss, that's all.
Bayat. Is it Bet?
Bayat.
Bayat,
Bayat.
yeah.
Wow. Okay.
It's awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice. I mean,
All right, Mayor and Council, our next work session is number 162, which I'll invite Paul Kane and the AECom team to the table. This is a discussion of architectural design updates for the Riverwalk redevelopment project from Webster all the way down to the law school at Baylor, as well as your first look at the facade of the Pavilion parking garage, which will be adjacent to the new Baylor Foster Pavilion. I'm going to ask, is it Paul or Tom doing the intro?
I'll do it.
All right, Paul's going to do the intro, Assistant City Manager Paul Kane, and he's been joined at the table by Tom Balk, our Assistant Director of Parks. So he'll clean up whatever Paul.
Maybe I shouldn't start at all then.
Let's go, Paul, you got it.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Good to see you today. Thanks for giving us this opportunity to present an update on where we are with both the Riverwalk as well as the design of the parking garage. We've made a lot of progress with regard to the Riverwalk, and we've set the elevations, which has allowed us to submit plans to both FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for permitting. And so that's in process now, and you'll hear some updates from Andrew Albers, who's with OJB. And then on the garage, we're at a point where we need some decisions from the council, and so you'll see today our final design that AECom has put together, and Scott will be presenting that information here in a few minutes, and we'll look for your guidance on that design as well. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Andrew, and Tom is going to help interject. He's been instrumental in the review of the plans and working with Andrew and his team from a park perspective, both in terms of design and maintenance. So Tom, jump in anytime you need to. All right?
Right. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, council and mayor, for giving us the opportunity to give you an update on the progress. Just to note, like Paul mentioned, we have our scheduled milestone that we were working hard to meet was submitting for Army Corps and FEMA approvals. That's the long duration approvals. We were targeting at the beginning of this year to do that. Those are in, and we are awaiting comments. So Walker Partners has been instrumental in working with us on that, managing that submittal, and has been communicating with Army Corps and FEMA to move that along. Also wanted to note that in addition to the Riverwalk, this district also includes the Clay Avenue project, the University Parks project, the Promenade Development project, which includes the redevelopment of Lake Brazos Park. We've been working closely with all of those teams to integrate all of these design efforts together, and so that they all are one cohesive district. To that end, we've issued the garage project and the landscape for the garage project and landscape for and engineering for Clay Avenue recently, and we'll touch on some of the design in Clay Avenue as it relates to the Riverwalk. In addition to working towards the Army Corps design submittal and progress, we've also been working to develop a project statement. While I won't read this for you here, we've constructed this project statement as a guidepost for us to look back and measure our progress as we give more detailed formal design to all of the elements. And I wanted to highlight three aspects of this statement, which are the local geology, the social history, and ecological context. Those three elements are keys to, as we look at the specific formal design, we'll look back at those key elements and sort of measure all of the decisions that we make. So this slide here is showing development of the plan. This reflects what has been submitted to the Army Corps and FEMA. And it's very similar to the plan that you saw last time we presented. So between the red lines are our scope elements, so just upstream of Webster Avenue, we're tying into the existing Riverwalk at that elevation, so you'll be able to seamlessly come up from the existing Riverwalk into the new segment of the Riverwalk. You progress past Webster, past the restaurant sites, through the reconfigured cove, under I-35, around the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame, and then winding around through the future program areas and working to preserve existing trees in that area. You finally come back over near Baylor Law School, where you'll tie back into the existing Riverwalk. And then this slide here, this is kind of an engineering design surface. So this is the topographical surface that we've been working with Walker Partners and AECOM to model and develop. And this has been the focus of the work so far. We've been shaping the topography to reconfigure the river edge, to reconfigure the spaces, to get our path up out of the floodplain, to keep it at that higher elevation, and then also create these program areas. So from the lower left, working around the existing trees, we've connected the path to the existing Riverwalk. We wind around the existing trees, staying at the elevation above the floodplain, have sculpted the land to create the program areas and make the connection back to the parking. We swing out around the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. We've come underneath I-35, and that's where you see where we've taken the edge of the Brazos River and brought it up to the face of the water wall that we'll look at. And then we come around with the reconfigured cove, and we come up to Webster and then descend back down to connect to the existing. So just a tour of kind of the sculpting of this land that we've been working on. And part of our project statement, we talked about social history. We've looked at these interpretive opportunities before. As the project develops, we'll be giving more specific form to each of these individual elements and looking for spaces how they take form in the specific design. But as a sort of preview of what those spaces are and what we're looking for, we wanted to highlight a space that's been created at the Clay Avenue project. So this is on Clay Avenue. To the left is University Parks Drive, and then at the bottom of the page is the garage that Scott will talk about in just a second. And one of the things that we've noticed is that the historic marker for A.J. Moore High School, which is currently located closer to the river, really isn't located exactly where A.J. Moore High School was physically within this district. Looking back at the historic maps in the Texas room, the high school actually was between First Avenue and River Street at Clay Avenue. So it's more in the location of the garage here, and we thought to ourselves, well, this is a great opportunity to create one of these spaces that we've been talking about. So on the top of the page, more towards the west, is the promenade development that the two buildings flanking either side of the little red triangle and the dot there are apartment buildings and retail spaces, and behind that is a public parking garage. And coming down through that red rectangle is a paseo that leads people out of the garage into the development or on their way to the Foster Pavilion. And what we thought was, as you come out, you have people coming out that will be coming into the streetscape here. We also have a row of parallel parking and wanted to break that up. And then at the garage, we have a pretty tight site, so we wanted to relocate the historic marker on the site of the actual high school, A.J. Moore Academy. But this space was an opportunity, so as you come out of the garage, you could be in this little interpretive space. So you come out on pavers, we create a little space for gathering. In the ground plane will be a medallion that will have a historic map of this location showing you where A.J. Moore High School is, and then an informative plaque that's raised up so that you have images of the high school, you have information, and as you come into this space, you are presented information, you look across the street, you can see where the high school was, and you also have benches and a place to gather and reflect on the space, or perhaps just rest in general. And so it's this type of space that we're looking to create with the interpretive spaces at the Riverwalk. But this was a great example of a piece that's had a little bit more time to develop. One of the things that we're doing, just the same way that the plaque and the ground plane allowed us another interpretive opportunity, is looking at how we can integrate interpretive information or signage into the ground plane of the Riverwalk, whether it's textures or words or maps, and looking at where that might happen in the map, in the plan below. So in addition to signage elements, in addition to seating and creating spaces, actually putting that information on the ground plane as you move through the space. Another element that we've been developing with Tom and Parks are gateway elements. This is an example of where we are in the process of developing that. The vertical column representing or being symbolic of the geology and the stratification of the limestone, like you would see at Cameron Park, and then the bridging element that comes out across the path, forming the gateway that speaks more towards the bridges over the Brazos and the sort of structure that they have. We are continuing to develop the water wall under I-35. The progress that we've made there is the development of the bridge element that swings out around, bringing the water underneath up to the base of the water wall, and then looking at the actual location of the water wall itself underneath the main lanes of the interstate. At the termination of Webster, we're developing that space, the shade structure as it's given form, a cantilevered structure with perforated metal panels that provide shade around the outer perimeter so you can gather and look out over the river. And then in the center of that space, looking at that as another opportunity for interpretive elements. At the Cove, which is probably the area that we're doing probably the biggest change in the topography, reconfiguring that cove space. This is looking at another opportunity for those gateway elements. You're looking at the Foster Pavilion in the background, the pathway coming up to your right, taking you to Clay Avenue and Lake Brazos Park, and the pathway to your left that swings out on that bridge that takes you over the cove so that you can experience being over the water. You can also experience the water feature that would then be located within the center of the cove. And then this is pulling back and looking at the cove from above. Looking down, you can see the bridge, you can see the water element, and you can see the pathways coming around. So where we are in the process, this is the sort of overall schedule that we had presented last time we spoke with council. We've moved the red line. The red line on the left side or kind of more towards the first third, is where we are today, middle of March of 2023. We're in design development. We have made our submissions to FEMA and Army Corps. We expect to receive comments from them late spring, early summer. We will begin construction documents as we receive those comments and begin addressing those comments. So simultaneously working to address any comments that we receive along with developing the construction documents with the goal of completing them early December of this year, starting permitting and bidding, with construction starting spring of next year. And then Scott was going to give you an update on...
Could you go back to that last slide really quick for me? Thanks. So plan of October of 25 completion.
That is currently, I think, what we're tracking.
Yeah, and I'll say this isn't like a nuanced schedule. There's been consideration of it finishing the section by the pavilion first. This isn't broken into that level of detail. Also, with some variability on when the approvals will get done, if the construction documents can be brought up, at that point we'll develop with the contractor the completion of different sequences and priority.
Okay.
I have a question, Paul. On page 61, interpretive opportunities. Where is the plaque for Sandtown gonna
So, a couple things.
Nothing.
Yes, well, we haven't gotten to the level of detail yet. We are planning much more than a plaque for all these
hopefully,
locations.
I was just
Yes,
getting
ma'am.
a little
Yeah, so-
antsy about, I think this, what you put on the, on page 63, that's awesome. I think something in that type would be great, because all of that area was Sandtown. All of that was Hispanic businesses and business homes.
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't want us to forget that. And this little bitty thing that you're putting here for that, it's kind of like a slap to my face, because this is my Hispanic culture,
Yes, ma'am.
the Hispanic history of the city of Waco. And it looks like you're overlooking it.
Well, I apologize.
my opinion.
I apologize if you sense that. That certainly was not our intent. From this slide, you'll see a number of the different historical elements that all are involved in this area. And we are endeavoring to give each the attention level. If you go to the A.J. Moore slide. One more. The A.J. Moore site here, and Andrew kind of went over what the plans are for this specific site. Our intent, council member, is to take this same sort of approach that looks at history and design into all of these different elements, whether it be Sandtown and its history to the area, lots of the other history that's happened along the river. We've even discussed a statue for Mr. De Cordova at the Webster Outlook, something like that, because obviously all this land, if we go back in history, at some point was all his. And so we want to acknowledge the history, the varied history along the whole corridor here, and give each level this same level of attention that we've fleshed out here for A.J. Moore to all the different sites.
And Councilmember
It worried me.
Yeah.
that we were not, we were forgetting the history of that area. And the history of that area is our Hispanic culture, our Hispanic roots.
Well, Ms.
That's where we were at. Our businesses were there.
Yes, ma'am.
Our grocery stores were there, and our homes were there. And I said,
Yeah. So, Ms.
and I used to live pretty close to the original Moore High School.
Right.
I used to go over there a lot to listen to their bands and their athletics departments when they were practicing out there. But we lived directly across from First Street Cemetery. So all this here, everything you got here, I lived there.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
know what went on there. And I don't want us to forget that part of Waco's history, which is us, the Hispanic people that lived in that area before urban renewal and Highway 35, Interstate 35 broke us up. But that was the area where all the Hispanics lived up to St. Francis Catholic Church.
Yes,
All of
ma'am.
that was Hispanic businesses, except for Frank Smith Produce and poultry thing that they had there on the corner of St. Francis. But I don't want you to forget
No, ma'am.
us.
No, ma'am.
And I kind of felt like you were.
Well, so let me.
Let me say something really quick, Paul, because
Okay.
I really, from this council member, respectfully feel like they're really trying to incorporate and honor the history. And I think what's incumbent on us is knowing that they're working in good faith to do that. And if we have ideas specifically about what that might look like or might be, we've got to bring that to them, because I really think they are working in very good faith. I mean, this slide here that honors the history and the geography and the I greatly appreciate that. I think I sense a deep good faith in trying to achieve this. I think we've got to know that that's working in good faith, but bring them our ideas if we got them.
I'll be glad to meet with you, Paul, but I just did, I looked at this picture and it didn't, you know, that area, again, Fort Fisher wasn't there when I was growing up. The Brazos Queen wasn't there. It has been, and I remember them. The tornado, of course, the Hispanic community was very instrumental in volunteering and clearing up the area, because I know my dad and my uncles all took part in cleaning the city of Waco's, the tornado, buildings, because they were looking for my uncle. They couldn't find him. They thought he was at R.T. Dennis building, but which he later became our assistant police chief, Joe Rodriguez. That's who they were looking for. But I just don't want us to forget that is our Hispanic culture. We were there.
Yes, ma'am.
We lived there, and I don't know how much before I was born, I'm sure they were there. And so I just didn't get that feeling.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I had to bring it up, and
No,
thank you for.
I 100% understand, and honestly, you can blame me, because we were further down the road with what we were planning to do for A.J. Moore High School, so we wanted to show you that as an example of what
I think that's awesome.
what we like to do for all these different historical elements along the Riverwalk, and provide each one of them that level of design, both in terms of plantings and rock use and all benches and all sorts of things, along with signage. Something that allows people to read something about it, to access a video, for example, from the Waco History site. All of that is the intent here. So I thought maybe showing you the A.J. Moore would give you some sense of what we're looking at for all of them. We just weren't.
That's nice. I
Yeah,
like that.
we're just not as far enough down the road to show you all the different sites.
Just didn't
We
want
wanted
us to forget, Paul.
No,
that's
ma'am.
all.
We won't. And I will say this,
Especially
Andrew and
now.
his team has spent a lot of time going through history. For example, the James Andrew Harris that you see there at the bottom was something that was not even on our radar, and his team brought that forward through their research of Waco and the area. So a graduate of A.J. Moore High School, I believe. So there's a lot here for us. We show you the A.J. Moore thing is just an example of what we're looking at doing throughout the site.
Like I said, that part is awesome. I think that's really great.
Well, I
But I
think,
just wanted to
no, I
make sure
understand, I
that
understand.
we didn't forget us who live there. And
We did not, and we have talked, I would say numerous times, over the last, few months, since our last presentation certainly, and I know that Tom and Andrew and the team have talked a lot about how we acknowledge the history of the river and the history of the neighborhoods there. And as we move further in design, again, at this point, we've really been working hard just to set the grade so we can get the approvals we need. As we start coming back to you, we'll have fleshed out each one of these historical elements in much more detail. And then if you don't like what we give you then, I'll certainly be sad that we didn't meet your expectations, because I think we understand what they are, and we'll get that to a level that I think you'll
I just didn't want us to forget,
appreciate.
and looking at this, it kind of made me look like you
No,
forgot a
we
little bit about it.
have not forgotten, have not forgotten.
Thank you.
One
thank
of
you.
the things,
I won't
Councilman,
belabor this, but thank you.
Councilmember Rodriguez, one element that I did want to note is that our intent is not to just provide signage. That a plaque gives a level of information. That's one thing that we want to do. We want to have interpretive signage so that you can sit down and you can read and you can understand. But we also wanted to create spaces where the community can gather, reflect on the space, that there's symbolic elements in the paving, there's symbolic elements in the material selections. And so by creating a space, having various levels of reading and interpretation. And Sandtown is very important to the story of this place, and really wanted to create a space that is about Sandtown, that tells the story of Sandtown. So having signage, creating a space, and then we've also talked, as Paul has mentioned, having that other layer of information that would allow you to access digital information through QR codes or other links. So really it's a multifaceted approach, and centered in the sort of centerpiece of that approach is creating spaces. And so I did want to reassure you that is definitely the goal. That is something that we're very interested in furthering, but as Paul mentioned, we're kind of in that in-between stage where we're still working through the detailed formal design.
Thank you.
I'll jump in here too, before we start talking about the garage, but I love the presentation here, and I know that as we formulate business plans, which all of us have done that in our private lives and our private businesses, but there's always a part where you have a BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal, and I think that this council says, wouldn't it be great? I think all citizens of Waco have said for the last 50, 75 years, 100 years, wouldn't it be great if we built out a really super-looking Riverwalk? And I like the confluence of circumstances that are coming together with the team, the council, the staff, the resources, the opportunity. And all Wacoans, all visitors are going to be able to enjoy this Riverwalk, and it is so super special. And Alice brings out some great points on the interpretive opportunities and the fact that you're incorporating those into this. And we haven't seen the final bits yet. I agree, and those will get formulated over the next months. And how they manifest themselves, obviously, we'll weigh in on that as it goes. But to get this going, to me, to launch this project, with the interpretive opportunities, A.J. Moore, Sandtown, and all these other ones here on page 61, the event lawn, the water wall, the overlook, the cove, the connectivity, just everything about this is fantastic and once in a lifetime and once in the history of the city. And the fact that we're all here doing it is exciting to me. And I just, as we get this going, and I like again, you got a Gantt chart in here that I really like. And we'll be keeping track of that too as it stretches out, or we don't want it to stretch out. A couple of quick questions on just the look of it, the elevation, and maybe I go back to page 60. And I really hadn't thought a whole lot about it. And the elevation now is very consistently kind of right on the water, basically, or maybe a foot or two above. And that has lent itself to sort of inconsistent access when it rains a lot. It's been a while since that's happened, but this is going to be a little bit higher off the water. So we're going to maybe lose some intimacy, I'll call it, or, but there are, can you kind of run by, there are some spots here where it does get down closer to the water, is that right? Or
Where we are getting close to the water is just downstream from the cove. So that there's a high path that runs and connects with the bridge by the, underneath I-35, which is where the water wall is.
Got it.
And at that area, we're coming down to the existing bulkhead, and you have a portion where you are able to access and get down to that elevation of the water. So where you are currently, just to the riverside of where Foster Pavilion is being built, the Riverwalk currently goes along that edge, and you are right at the water level. You'll still be able to get to the water level there. As you move downstream towards Baylor Law, there were some existing little fishing piers that were there.
Mhm.
We've shown those as being removed. Currently, we're not showing anything, but we have talked internally and with Tom about trying to reintroduce those elements. So you'll have little areas where you could get back down to the water still in those areas. But as we've talked through the sort of long-term maintenance and use of the Riverwalk, really wanting to keep the main path out of the flood has been a goal. So we have one location that's currently documented where you are getting down. We'd like to introduce a couple more where those existing fishing piers are. And then another element that's not really reflected here is that we have a path that we're developing that would allow you to get down and take a kayak and be able to, you know, as a private person,
Launch
take your
right from
kayak
there.
down and get down into the water. And where we're currently looking at that is kind of on the downstream side of the water wall, so you would actually go down, and what we're testing is whether or not that really works to get down, and you would launch right at the water wall underneath I-35.
Got it. The other two other observations. One, other one is the lighting. I'm sure this is going to have state-of-the-art lighting, because that's one problem we have in the existing one. Again, I'm not trying to compare one to the other, but I just want to make sure that that's an important functionality there. Safety and lighting, and we want everybody to use it and everybody to feel like it's day or night. We can go down there and look at the new Riverwalk.
We're working with AECOM's electrical engineering and lighting team to make sure that we're meeting appropriate light levels. I offhand don't know what the foot candle is. I think it's 2.5 to 5. I don't
think so.
I'm obviously being quoted on that by being recorded, but don't quote me on that. We're looking to the municipal code for guidelines
Sure.
for those, and we're meeting those requirements. And then, in addition to the general illumination along the pathway, we're selecting fixtures that will project light along the path. Not a lot of light pollution is what we're aiming for. We're aiming for dark sky fixtures, and then
Sure.
at the various key elements having feature lighting.
For reference on that topic, the bridge or the trail that was constructed to connect to McLean Stadium, I know there's been some interruptions with the use of that trail, but when it went in, the standards question was the same, and I think we ended up with a certain type of light that ended up on 100-foot spacing and illuminated that area really well. So I imagine it's going to be similar for this, where we do want to be dark sky sensitive, but we want people to use the trail, and so it's got to feel safe. You got to be able to see what you're doing. So it's going to achieve a pretty significant difference compared to what you may recall from this stretch of Riverwalk before.
Yeah, which was not great.
Not
Two more things here I've got. And the mayor kind of hit on some of this really doesn't lend itself to phases, does it? I mean, you kind of have to do it. You're not going to open one little part and then, because it's all connective. So I guess it's going to be done or opened all at once for the most part. Or
I'll speak to that schedule, is that, you know, because it gets engaged from various points, in terms of the connectivity, 100%, you know, you'd have to finish the whole thing to create that vision of
Can you
connection.
scoot your
but-
mic up a little bit?
Sorry. In terms of creating that continuity of the Riverwalk system, it's not done until it's done. But to the extent that it's engaged as the front lawn of the new pavilion and it's the front door of the restaurant development and the marina, you'll interact with it at different stages. And so I was speaking earlier to the idea that if there's any way we can get something on schedule to complete at the same time as that performance center on the north side of the pavilion, or, you know, all of the other components, everything in here is being developed at once, right? Not just the parts we own. So we'll be trying to find alignments of completion so that people aren't in a newly developed area with a construction site on the riverbank, right?
Got it?
Yep.
And I know that and going back to the Gantt chart, just as we go out for permitting and bidding, I mean, all of these elements are so important to the project: the event lawn, the water wall, the overlook, the cove, the interpretive structures. And I know you can't tell what the bidding is going to look like, 9 months from now, but as things start falling out or being compromised, I mean, let council know, because again, this is sort of a hallmark event in the history of the city. And I don't really want to lose any of this, but I mean, I get it if economically things start going in a certain direction. I don't know what else to say about that. I mean, we'll find out at the end of the year here.
Yeah, we will, and if I could maybe dovetail into one of your previous comments, Councilmember, you talked about the big, hairy, audacious goal. We also have the big, hairy, audacious budget for this project as well. We're looking at around $27 to $28 million for this stretch of trail, which is substantial investment by the city and our TIF partners in doing this. So that allows us to address that quality that you're looking for, that nod to history that you're looking for, lighting, all those things that the trail has lacked for a long time. So, we're certainly cognizant of dollars and budget in this, and I think as we move through the process, we'll be looking at ways in terms of bidding and construction to streamline that process as well.
Good.
And to hopefully cost contain as well. But I think the council and our TIF partners have set the budget at a high level that can really make this that quality attraction that Waco's been looking for a long time. So
Great. Thanks, Paul, Tom,
thank you for that.
team. Appreciate it.
Just a couple of things. That $28 million, is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
Where do we expect that money to come from?
It has already been approved by the city and the TIF board, the Tax Increment Financing or Tax Increment Reinvestment Zone, TIRZ board, and the plan is already set in place for that and approved by all the bodies.
Excellent.
So, yes,
And
sir.
then on page 65, would you tell me again what that is?
So we don't have our slides numbered the same as yours, so maybe
Well, it's a
Tom, you want to help me
architectural.
out? Okay,
That's
Vignette.
it.
there you go.
These, the intent is that along the Riverwalk, there would be gateway elements. So as you move along this portion of the Riverwalk, there would be almost like little monuments that then sort of demarcate spaces as you move through them. We have not finalized all the locations of them or the design, but the intent is that this is a sort of iconic element that would be repeated along this face of the river.
So there would be several of these, and they would have signs on them that says what they're for and that kind of thing. Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else? Okay, next we will proceed to the parking garage. I think somebody help me in the back. All right, great.
Yeah, there we go.
Awesome.
So this is a design update on the pavilion parking. This is going to be focused on the architectural expression. Separate from the core and the superstructure of the building is under construction now. They're drilling the deep foundations. That piece is on its own track. We've decoupled the design of the facade, which you'll see here today, to allow more time for developing its expression. So that if we're close to sign off, if what we've shown is in alignment with everybody's expectations, we could be to permit drawings in around 6 weeks, or if more development time is needed, if there's any course corrections we need to make, that would not prevent the structure itself and the 450 event parking spaces from being completed by the end of the year on the same timeline as the venue site. All right, let's see if this works. Design update. I want to say sort of a unique thing about this parking garage is that it's a building with 4 public faces. It's not backed up to anything. It's there, and there's occupied public approach from all sides. It's got 3 functions. It's our primary event parking, VIP event parking. It is a commuter parking for the residents or the occupants of Clifton Robinson Tower, and then it's public parking for the whole mixed-use development. It's got 2 identities because it really wants to be a good neighbor here and address the language of the pavilion, and on the other side, it wants to be, have the appropriate character for Catalyst and the Riverwalk development. So we're going to show you views from all sides and talk about the materiality here. That's the expression, but I'll also speak to the functions going on behind in case everybody isn't familiar with them. So this here is a view from a drop-off lane, and the pavilion is there on the right side. So this is what we're calling the Pavilion Plaza. And what you see, I'll start from maybe a right to left on that. At the far right, it's the northeast corner of the parking structure. That's where, when it's in event parking mode, the parkers will come in and go down elevator and stair core there. And that part of the facade has aluminum curtain wall that speaks to the materials we've used on the pavilion, and some forms. The cornice there is trying to speak to the language of the pavilion. And as you continue down this side, this parking garage has to be open air for ventilation. So we've used a screen printed mesh, and there's a combination of what looks like maybe just a tan pattern there. It can be a placeholder, but we put, that's like an amber grains, sort of a large scale pattern that speaks to the landscape and geography of the area, combined with graphic panels, and you see what's looking maybe more like magazine covers of Baylor identity and Baylor branding, interspersed with some vertical banners. We could, and once the city's happy with this and we can work more closely and collaboratively with Baylor, we can figure out, do they want to change out those vertical banners for events? What would they want to put on those big panels? So we're at the stage where there's still time to refine that. At the street level, you see a nod into the first 20 to 25 feet of this building is a leasable retail core, and so you're seeing storefront glazing, static signage. There's a canopy element, and the brick on this side is the red Baylor brick, the red Baylor color and scale of the masonry that they have on campus. And I'll pause on. So here's kind of a more direct on view so you can see the proportions and scale of this. And I'll make one note. We are making provisions for future large format video, active video boards on there. That green square is 50 feet wide and 20 feet high. It doesn't dominate that facade, but that's a very large video board. That's 2,000 square feet there. So we're making provisions to issue this, and again, maybe decouple that video project, not get in the way of it, make sure we've got the infrastructure in place to pull the trigger on that as soon as there's a plan in place.
Who has the final authority for the artwork?
Go back one.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember, as far as what the artwork
What it
looks
is
like,
and
yeah, it's the city's garage, and so we'll have the final decision there. Certainly, we'll look to Baylor, specifically during season events, for them to not only design but fund that advertisement for their sports teams during the season, and then outside of season, that's something we'll have to work through with them. One thing I do want to point out here, and maybe I'm jumping the gun on Scott a little bit, you'll notice that the scale here gets a little lost Scott mentioned the size of the video board at 50 by 20. You know, the building height is around 100 feet. Is
Yeah,
that right,
80 or
Scott?
90, yeah, yeah.
So it's getting up there, certainly on the right side. The other thing with regard to video that we'll have to do if council likes this design that you see today, we'll have to go back to Baylor and talk to them about the trees in the plaza. Because if we have 40-foot trees and in a video board there, you're gonna have a hard time seeing it unless you're right on it. So we'll need to have that discussion with them as we move forward, certainly. But I know this idea of you know, tying into the plaza and creating that sense of place in the plaza was important to them. So as council shows us your thoughts on this today, we'll be going back to them and discussing landscaping and tree height and those kinds of things.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, and this is a little bit further back. You see the tower on the east. And as we come around that U Park side, a little bit larger view of that. Again, we're carrying the Baylor brick around and the open mesh ventilation, the vertical banners, the same storefront around there with retail on both corners, with the clay and U Parks on the left corner there. Coming around further to the west, so here you start to see the view down Clay Avenue. As you'd come in, you'd turn up Clay Avenue and the entrance to the garage is there on the west side of the north half. I'll hit that again as we get to the straight on view, but as you get around the side, we get to a public stair and elevator in that, right after that first bay of Baylor brick, and that's our opportunity to switch the identity to more of the mixed use. So as I go here, you get the sense of that. So this faces Caddos Riverwalk development, and that's a 3 or 4 story scale. So you see we've switched from the Baylor brick as we stop at that vertical element. The second identity is more of a warm grays and tones that are complementary to the building across the street. And then we set a brick height and switch to a mesh material above to just kind of make a nod to that, bringing that scale down. At the street level, you see the retail continuing around. There's a interior service dock and trash facility for that retail section, and then on the far left is the 3 lanes in and out of the parking garage. So you come in, turn, and ramp up 20 to 25 feet to the parking that starts at level 2. And then circling around from the northwest, there's a part of Baylor's Pavilion there, just north of the building, closest to the VIP entrance, and there's some sitting spaces, some gathering spaces. And, you know, again, from this, you're looking at it through the pedestrian view. At this point, the farmer's market is just kind of off to your right and behind a little bit. So, you know, this is as you're coming in from the river, back from the Riverwalk Trail, something like that. And again, we carry that more mixed-use development identity, brick and materiality around until it hits that corner element, the storefront. Sorry. So I'd be happy to jump back to any view you'd like to talk about a little further.
Questions, comments?
The part that looks like the stone or whatever, the tan stone, that's actually just a mesh, right?
Yeah, it's a screen printed mesh,
Okay.
right? And any image could go on there. I mean, it could literally be photographs. We're suggesting one would be a environmental sort of graphic, not a recognizable image per se, in contrast with something that could be the super graphics. So I'll go back to that, I'm sorry.
Jim, while you're talking about that, if I can just jump in, when do we have to have the mesh purchased or selected by? Because I know this is moving fast, and y'all are on a fast deadline, but when does the mesh part need to be selected by? If you don't have it, can you get it to us? Because the thing that I'm swirling around is like, I would love to send someone from our team to go look what this looks like in real life somewhere, because I think to me that's going to dictate what I get excited about being on it.
Yeah.
Because from this perspective, it almost looks solid. I can kind of see what you're saying. You can see through there, but that's just going to have a big influence, I think, on what personally, I'm just one guy, y'all are the architects, but what will look best is if we could see. So I'm wondering if we have time. I'm assuming that that'll be one of the later parts of it, but I don't know what the.
Well, we've identified 3 or 4 or 5 places up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area was the locus, the manufacturer gave us installations, not that have this exact artistic expression, but that especially you could see the translucency or transparency. I'd love to head up towards Dallas. I'm going to stay an extra 2 days to create a window. If we could even get Paul and whoever, another group of representatives to go up there in the next 3 calendar days. I'll stay later if I need to, because making the decision that that's the right material is something we need to do right now, if we can. You can take as long as you want with the decision, but
There's consequences.
Yeah, and if I can add, you know, one of the, we've looked at not in person, but digitally looked at this material at a couple other sites, and Scott and I may end up in Dallas here in a day or two looking at a couple of things up there. But I think if you, no matter what the color, the material is essentially a metal screen, and if you think about any kind of screening like that, at certain angles, you have really good blockage. At other angles, you don't.
Yeah.
And particularly at night, if they're backlit, it's like looking in, when you drive down the street and people have their screen doors open, if they have their lights on inside the house, you can see inside the house because it's backlit. The same thing will happen here to some extent. If you have the parking garage backlit, which people want it to be lit so they'll feel safe, you're going to be able to see inside of it much better at night than you can during the day. That's just the way it's going to work. So we'll have to, you know, as we think about that screening material, we also have to think about airflow and all those types of things from the vehicles, you know, from the exhaust of the vehicles. So the material has a screening quality, certainly, and I think what's reflected here is really kind of a good balance between you can see inside of it in certain angles during the day. At other angles, it will screen very well. But ultimately, it's a screen, and you're going to be able to see inside of it.
On that said, maybe there is some reflective, you know, angle that they've developed where from the ground you can't see up and all you see is the mesh.
Yeah, there's some.
So to the mayor's point,
Yeah.
it'd be good if you went up there, not only during the day, but at night to kind of see what it looks like.
Yeah.
Wherever that example is. I had 2 other quick questions on it, or observations. To me, the trees are nice, but I think we've got to watch the density there. Because I mean, a nice little tree that's whatever, 20 foot high and beautiful and you can see over it. But 15 years later where it's now dominating the plaza, I'm a big fan of trees, but they maybe don't belong in a great number in the plaza there. And my last question is, how do we don't need to go into a lot of detail, I can follow up with you on this, but engaging the retail space, do we have that all planned out, the brokerage and who's clearing that?
So I've been communicating with the Baylor team on that. I think the best approach for us, this will be built as a shell to start. And I think the best approach will be for us to reach out to some firms through an RFQ process.
Yep.
And we've been sharing a list back and forth with the Baylor team and submit that to them and then go through the process of selecting someone to help us market this.
Great,
And
agreed.
ultimately, you'll see that a lot of this will be tenant finish out, and the floor will be essentially gravel to allow them to put their water lines, sewer lines, all those kinds of things where they need to put them, and then finish out from there.
Great, that's all I had, Mayor.
About 19,000 square feet or so of
Yeah.
leasable space on the ground floor is what we're looking
yeah, if
at.
you let me measure out to the outer face of the block, I can get to maybe 20,000, but realistically about 19,000 leasable.
Is there a reason that the whole building isn't made one way or the other? In other words, I'm looking at the red brick Baylor side, the other side was a different color.
Yeah, so contractually, in our agreement with Baylor, we're supposed to have compatible architecture on the plaza side as it relates to the pavilion. So that's why you see this look here. When you look at it from University Parks, you know, that the view looking at the garage and the pavilion somewhat set back, you know, it made sense to us also that there's a similar look there because you're looking at it from the street side. As Scott mentioned, when we turn on Clay, the design that the council has seen from the team over at Catalyst, it's much different type of architecture. So our thought was, and again, the cost here is not that much difference because we're dealing with the same screening material, just a little bit different color on it. And then the brickwork is just a different color brick versus the red brick on the other side. So the idea, once you turn down Clay, is to have that compatibility because there's going to be apartments essentially across the street from Clay looking across. And so the idea is for that to look more like their home and where they're living versus looking like a Baylor facility. So that was the thought, Councilmember, in terms of why we have different design looks.
Other questions, comments? My, one question I have is there a way to go back to that plaza side? I don't know if there's a way to do increased uplighting from the outside and if that possibly could deflect against some of what Paul was saying in terms of when it's nighttime and there's lights on the inside. So I think that might be an important element that provides additional screening components at night. I love the LED screens, and I think the more LED screens, the better. If that's unaffordable at this juncture, then I think that ensuring that there's infrastructure for more LED screens is something that's going to be important. I think that at some point, to the extent the plaza could have like 4 or more LED screens like that would be ideal. I think it's worth exploring whether or not you're able to monetize those, because I think that you can have opportunities whereby people rent ad space on those or have their name permanently above the screen. So it's the ABC Corp, whatever you call it, screen. But and they buy the rights to have that above the screen. So there might be a way to reduce the cost that I think is certainly worth exploring as well. I think that, but at minimum, let's get infrastructure so we can increase the number of screens. I already asked about when to have the mesh selected, and I definitely want to try to take a look at it. I like this because it's neutral and it makes it look like a building. I like this more than I would like photographs. It's said differently. I like the tan mesh complemented with the banner photos because it gives it kind of more a hardy structure feel. But I also don't know what alternatives might be. I really like on the back side there, you had some vinage. I think that's really important. I think the more of that, the better. A green feel looks good. And so to the extent, I know this is a very tall building, but to the extent that you can have, I think it's in the very back on the little square.
Yeah.
There it is. Like I love the idea of those squares being much taller and covering much more space. I think that it provides a natural look that makes people forget that it's a parking garage, which is ultimately the goal here, and has people see that as some ivy-wrapped, beautiful building. And so, and it might be harebrained and not be able to be pulled off, but I've even questioned, like, should the mesh look like ivy? But then does that just look like mesh that looks like ivy, not like ivy? And so,
Ivy looks like mesh.
like mesh. Anyway, I like the vine aspect both naturally and exploring that in other ways too. Because again, I just want us to really be strategic and creative about making this not look like a parking garage right next to the plaza. I think when you go back, if you just go back to the plaza view, our goal for that space is for it to be activated as much as possible, including on days that events are taking place inside the pavilion, but even on non-days. And so I think the aesthetic of this is going to be really critical to that activation and getting an ROI on the money that we've put into this. And so that's where, why I think the extra effort to mask what this is going to really produce an ROI when people are wanting to hang out in that place. I think about that plaza right outside the American Airlines Center. And just, there you go. and just the activation there. And so I think that this is a great crack at that, and those are just some of the comments I have to try to keep pressing into the idea of fully masking this. Thanks for your efforts on this. I know it's been a challenge. And Paul particularly, I know you spent so many hours on it.
Time well spent, I think. There's lots of different, obviously, opinions and ideas here, and I think Scott and the team have done a really good job of trying to pull all those together. Again, you mentioned American Airlines in Dallas. That's actually a little bit tighter than this in terms of geography, and the scale of ours is almost a little taller. I mean, you got 3 buildings that are pushing 100 feet on all 3 sides of the plaza. So what we've tried to do through the design, and you kind of see this along the retail space, is to try to bring your eyes down if you're in the plaza. You're not overwhelmed by the height of the buildings on either side, but your eyes tend to focus more on the street level. And so from an architectural standpoint, the overhangs of the buildings and those kinds of things is trying to bring your eyes down. And then, the scale of the graphics also helps give it, break up some of that scale as well. So it's a difficult balance. This is a small site. As Scott mentioned, when we all think of parking garages in some of the cities, even in Waco on the Baylor campus and other places, the garage is wrapped on 1 or 2 sides by something else and tucked away. Here, the garage sits on an island by itself, and so it's much more difficult to hide a garage when you're trying to deal with all 4 sides of it. I think they've done a great job here trying to bring you that different changes in scale, different changes in facade around it that help to break it up. But it's an architectural challenge for sure. Mayor, I love the idea of the lighting on the outside that can help combat some of that nighttime views that you were talking about earlier. So we can definitely look at that. But we'll look at a couple of the sites up in the Metroplex that have the same material, and we can even send you some street level views of what that looks like if you'd like to see it as well. But I feel like in terms of material, this is where we feel like we need to be. Color can change, graphics can change, but material, I think, is where we're at with this. So, and I'll say, if no further questions from the council, I do want to thank the staff, Tom and his team on the Riverwalk, on the garage, and really the whole development. Charles Least, who's not here today, Charles is the Deputy Director of Utilities, but he's also been kind of spearheading the day-to-day stuff, and I can't tell you how much work is going into that. See Jacob and the team back there as well. There's a whole lot going on in this space right now. Lots of engineering and infrastructure work being done. And Charles and Amy Bellarly Highland and Roger Glick and folks like that on our staff are meeting multiple meetings weekly to keep this project on task. So I want to thank them for their work, and certainly Tom and his team, and our great consulting team, AECOM and OJB. Thank them as well.
Thanks to all those parties, sincerely. It means so much to this community. This is going to be an excellent project, and it's really dynamic and exciting. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Council.
All right, next up, I'm going to invite the Mission Waco team up, as well as Galen Price, our Director of Community Services. We're going to have a discussion on Mission Waco's proposed Creekside Community Village project. I think we're going to hear from both Galen and John Calloway, who's the Executive Director of Mission World Mission Waco, Inc., and with a pretty innovative, oh, sure, we'll pass those out. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Do you mind? With a pretty innovative project that'll look to help address the issue of housing for the homeless. This is a type of project that's been completed across the country, and John and his team are looking to bring it to Waco. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Galen Price.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As Bradley mentioned, this project has the potential to assist with addressing some of our challenges identified in our strategic housing plan. The population this project would primarily serve are those individuals who are extremely low-income individuals earning between 0 and 30% of the median income, who are paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to John for him to shed some light on his idea.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Council members, certainly for the invitation from Galen City staff to come just give a presentation to kind of brief you on a new project that we're working on. It's in the infant stages, but we're excited about where we've come already and where we're headed in the next few months and hopefully years. A little bit about Mission Waco. Not everybody knows who we are. We do three things. We empower under-resourced communities, specifically North Waco, by providing Christian-based, holistic, relationship-centered programs. We also try to do a great job at equipping middle-class Americans to become more compassionately involved in under-resourced communities. And last, we want to engage in what we think systemic issues of social injustice, which continue to press these communities as well. We are 31 years old. We celebrated our 31st year last week with a banquet at the base. We've got 2,000 volunteers annually that serve across 17 plus programs. And we believe that from a fiscal standpoint at Mission Waco, and certainly with the existing social services that you'll see here that I won't go entirely through, we believe that we're especially in a good place to approach this project and pull it off successfully. A little bit about what we do with our existing social services. We have lots of different kinds of programs, after-school programs for teenagers and children, but specifically for this particular population, I wanted to help you see that we've got a history of property management, but also an experience with this particular population for over 20 years. We've got an existing 56-bed emergency shelter called My Brother's Keeper. We've got the Meyer Center at 12th and Washington, which serves a myriad of services from legal and health to job training, financial literacy, and counseling. We also just have, about 2 years old, an employment program. We've had employment programs over the years. But for the last 2 years, this program has successfully lifted up 20 individuals out of the shelter into permanent housing and to permanent jobs. We also have transitional housing and an ARC apartment that has 19 units. I'm speaking to the choir here when we all understand what the challenges are, especially as it relates to poverty, the rates of poverty, the excessive housing costs that our community faces. The most recent data from our point-in-time count from last year says that we have just less than 200 folks who are housing insecure. Based on a 2017 report that was done from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, we see that per individual that's on the streets, it costs our community just over $35,000. And you can imagine with me, when an individual goes into the ER of Baylor Scott & White and treats that as their primary care physician, what the costs are incurred by that hospital system, let alone the Waco Police Department, the Sheriff Department, the county jail, so on and so forth. If you were to take a conservative inflation number back from 2017 until now, that $35,000 number really jumps to about $43,000 per individual. You multiply that times the point-in-time count, and you'll see that on average, we're looking at about just over $8 million of expense for all of these chronically homeless individuals that are on our streets in Waco, Texas. That same publication in 2017 said that if there is permanent and supportive housing for this particular population, which is the project we're talking about today, you can reduce that number up to 50% at about $4.1 million. We believe there's a solution, and we're calling it Creekside Community Village. Now, this is, again, a proposal still in its infant stages, but it's also, I think, important to note here that this proposed development will not solve all of the homelessness in our city, but it really could help mitigate it. We believe that housing alone will not end homelessness for an individual, but community will. Creekside is permanent and it's supportive. We believe that this transformative community, combining permanent supportive housing with life-giving community engagement, is possible. This community exists to empower our friends coming out of homelessness and long for a permanent place to call home. At full capacity, we hope to provide homes for over 150 formerly homeless men and women and provide wraparound services with the existing Mission Waco services that we have, alongside of the already existing collaborative partners, to keep these individuals off the streets and into community. Now, this 150 number, I believe, is a conservative guesstimate. As we engage the architect and we'll look at the number of units we can have on this property, I'm hopeful to have as many as 200 units, depending on what other multipurpose facilities we have. The word homeless, in quotations, includes these defined as by HUD, federal government, but we also want to include those that are staying at low-income, low-budget motels, like the recent former Oak Lodge. There will be a lengthy application process, including must having been here in McLennan County for over 1 year. Now, I also want to note this, the beginning phase, the phase one, will also include trusted individuals that have come through our services, perhaps have relationships also with maybe Dr. Doral with Church Under the Bridge. But we want to start with a solid group of people that we believe have the best possible outcomes and would thrive in an environment like this. The last group of people that we hope to see in this development are what we're calling missionals. And these are residents that are not formerly homeless but choose to live in community with those who are. We believe that this mixed income approach is healthier, it creates a more sustainable neighborhood, and will help provide residential care and community. And this population will make up, we've hoped, to about 20% of the overall population of the village. I would like to add here that my sister and brother-in-law and their 4 children are a missional family in Austin and have been for over 5 years. Yes, 6 people living in a 450 square foot tiny home is possible. I wouldn't recommend it, but I guess it's possible. This development, though, I want to be clear, is based on Community First model by Mobile Loaves and Fishes in Austin, Texas. We didn't make this up. It's a proven model, and while I'd love to take you all down to Austin, I hope I can, to show you firsthand what it looks like. I hope this visual gives you a glimpse into what we hope to see right here in our own backyard in Waco, Texas.
I know that in your family, you have a drug addict, an alcoholic, or somebody battling a behavioral health issue. But your family comes up underneath that individual to ensure that they never find themselves up underneath the bridge and on the street corners of our respective cities. We believe that the single greatest cause to homelessness is the profound, catastrophic loss of family. Goodness, it's giving your best first.
Got a lot of ends on these sandwiches, man. We must have some short loaves. On the bread. No wait.
Goodness is love in action.
TV also.
We're here to serve. We really thank groups like you guys coming out here, opening your hearts and minds. Just experience the village today. That's your #1 goal. There's a lot of work to do, but a lot of it is going to be relational. It's not a handout.
It's a hand up. We're trying to do this and make it bigger, get more people. Let's clear the streets of people that are chronically homeless.
With our neighbors.
This community. This hope.
I have found a lifestyle of abundance.
Oh yeah, beautiful.
Housing alone will never solve homelessness, but community will.
Thank you for that. After that video, I fully expect Dr. Doyle to learn how to play the guitar and/or the harmonica. This supportive permanent housing solution will potentially include 3 types of housing. But before we get to pictures and I show you and help you understand what those look like, the proposed property that we're looking at is 67 acres off of University Parks Drive in between LaSalle and Highway 6. We think that out of all the properties we've seen over the last year, this checks most of the boxes that we needed for it to be a successful location for this kind of community village. It's got access to existing utilities. It is outside the city limits, but it is also in the Waco ETJ. We believe that it's accessible via bus to essential partnering services. We've already begun working with Waco Transit to be able to see if it's possible, and we think it is, to get a bus stop out there for our folks. What I love about this property too is it provides over 35 acres of green space to include multiple kinds of parks and agricultural development as well. The timeline, the survey by Walker Partners should be done this week. We will soon then engage the architect, the same architect that designed Community First in Austin has been helping us, and we hope to close on that property at the end of June, June 29th. You'll see in relation to where it is outside the city or outside the districts in the city, it's close to Councilwoman Barefield's District 1, and you can kind of see how the back end of the property hits the Brazos River and kind of catty corners with Highway 6 as well. As an aerial view, I kind of helped with this picture understand where Phase 1 will potentially be, and you can see the extreme distance, the really big distance between where that is and where it hits the riverfront. I think anytime you have riverfront development, you know this better than I do, you want to be careful as to what the environmental impact is going to be, and we will be, even when it's fully built out, still over 35 acres away from between facilities and the river. You'll also see an aerial view from Highway 6 as the back of the property hits the Brazos River. Now, this supportive permanent housing is going to have 3 kinds of homes. First are the micro homes, which you'll see pictured below on the left. Next, we have partially... No, you didn't, Siri. Sorry. They're always listening. Second, we have partially plumbed homes, and then park model homes, which you'll see there on the right, which is fairly typical to your stereotypical tiny home village or place. The rental rates are dependent upon which unit the individual chooses. You're looking at about a $450 rental rate for those park model homes that you see at about 450 square feet. For the micro homes, you're looking anywhere between, and also the hybrid homes, anywhere between $350 and about $375 a month for those lease rates. The site map design will be neighborhood-centric. It will include community kitchens and for some, individual bathrooms in a centralized location. The point here is community. That's what all of this is about. From the design of the homes to the programming involved with this kind of community, it's all about promoting and encouraging people to walk outside and get to one another, because we're not just facing a mental health crisis with these individuals, we're not just facing low-paying jobs or physical or mental disabilities, but we are facing isolation. Mother Teresa said one of the most devastating forms of poverty is loneliness. And so by providing front porches for every single property, when you walk out on your front porch, the idea is that you would see 6 to 10 other front porches with people also being out there as well. Human interaction is what's going to happen in community that combats isolation. The microhomes pictured here are a great example of the uniquely designed, beautifully built structures that will invite hospitality and create an opportunity for dignified living, which are not words that describe the current housing opportunities for this particular population. This will be a one-of-a-kind development, affirming to all that Waco is indeed a community that values equal opportunity for all to experience high-quality housing, and that it is possible for someone to go from what is thought to be a drain on society to instead to be known as a contributing member to our community. One of the elements that I think are unique to this development are the community kitchens. Designed with only the highest commercial cooking equipment in mind, it will create a place for cooking skills to be learned because residents will use those on a daily basis, but it also will create fellowship to be experienced and provide an opportunity for groups like businesses and churches, Sunday school classes, and small groups to come and cook and have fellowship with our neighbors. Also, some of the units will utilize an individualized, centralized location bathroom. These state-of-the-art facilities will provide individual showers, bathrooms, Wi-Fi-enabled laundry rooms to a few of the neighbors who are living in these microhomes. I think this is important because it encourages community, as do the kitchens, while also allowing Mission Waco to control the cleanliness and the sanitary environment from a public health perspective of each of the bathrooms. If you can imagine someone coming off the streets of a decade, giving them a bathroom and asking them to take care of it, it's hard enough for me to take care of my own bathrooms in my house. And so for the sake of cleanliness and the sanitary environment, having individualized bathrooms in these central locations, I think are key to creating not just a safe place, but a clean place as well. So instead of relying on these individuals to take care of their own bathrooms, we have the ability to make sure it's as clean and pristine as possible. On a lesser note, I think a less important note, the way these communities are designed, when you introduce plumbing, especially to the micro homes that won't have any, you do introduce twice the cost of that home, which then has to be passed down to someone who is renting that space. When we've surveyed individuals at My Brother's Keeper, with also Dusty's folks at the Hangar, which is under 1718th Street property with folks that are staying in camps, they've loved the idea of choice. And that's what empowerment is all about. They'll get to choose whether or not they want to live in a microhome and maybe have to walk 35 or 40 feet to use the bathroom, or they can choose to pay more in a hybrid or a park model home. They get that choice. You'll see a lot of individuals like you do in Austin where perhaps they started because they didn't have a job and were just living off a check of some sort in a microhome, but then maybe got a permanent job and now could afford a hybrid or a park model home that had more square footage. But it's all about choice. I think there's also numerous creative opportunities to explore, like these 3D printed homes, outdoor activities, and even competitions for builders and architects to partner with. The blue home, the front blue siding on the right, is the first lived-in 3D printed home in the world. Next, I think one of the creative opportunities are the acres of farmland and green space that we'll have. The back half of this property is in between the facilities and the Brazos River. We'll provide over 35 acres of all kinds of possibility. Imagine with me not a golf course, maybe a disc golf course, hike and bike trails, gardening with possibly a Saturday farmer's market for the neighbors, maybe even a meditation and prayer garden, or perhaps some chickens or an off-leash dog park. A key part of any healthy community are the outdoors amenities to enjoy together. There will also likely be multi-purpose spaces in which to hold large gatherings, like to come watch the Super Bowl, or to have office space, or places for partnering organizations to come and host events or to see clients. Now, at the beginning, it will be easy, assuming we only have a bus stop, to get people to agencies we already partner with. But if we get north of 50 to 100, certainly 150 to 200, I hope we'll be fortunate enough, for instance, to have some of the spaces available on our property for partnering and collaborative organizations in our city like Behavioral Health Network, Waco Family Medicine. It'd be fun to see, like we do in Austin, that one of the particular health providers, a hospital system, helped build and staff a health clinic on site for those individuals, because now they have about 500 people living on site. The surrounding neighborhoods, I think, is important to point out that in Austin, not only has Community First been an asset to the greater Austin area, it's also encouraged other developments as well, which is interesting. I think most people would assume it would be the opposite. From the pictures below, you'll see now one high-end tiny home development, also, and that's on your right there, a moderate income development up on your top left, and then the existing suburban development, you've seen a dramatic increase in property values as well. I think one might be concerned, I would assume they'd be concerned about the safety and security of the residents in the previously built suburban neighborhood as Community First went in. But as history and the last 7 or so years have found, the fencing that surrounds Community First is really actually to keep the suburban residents out, not the Community First residents in. Now, on to the questions. These are the questions that all of us have. It's the questions that I had when I was a on staff at a church in Austin before we made a 10-year, $1 million commitment to Community First in Austin. Certainly I had these questions when my sister told me she was planning on moving her and her family onto this property as well. I want to walk through each of these, and then certainly a couple more slides later, have some more Q&A available to you. First and foremost, will this resource attract more homeless to Waco? Those who simply relocate to Waco will not qualify. Again, you must be here for at least 1 year. We already have that with our existing shelter at some level. If you're going to stay outside of county, if you come from outside of county, you have 3 nights you can stay at My Brother's Keeper, but then you can no longer stay there. Individuals in our shelter, if they're out of county, have to move on. But if you're from McLennan County, you then become a part of our programming, and eventually you may qualify for a project like this. How will you handle crime and drug use? Like any neighborhood, we cannot always control what goes on in someone's home. But if, however, it spills out into the neighborhood and causes problems, of course the appropriate authorities, just like any neighborhood, would be called. Policies, leases, and the law certainly will dictate the severity of punitive action for someone who doesn't obey those. Next, will residents pay rent? Absolutely, yes. This is the #1 rule. This is not a handout. It is a hand up, and it aligns with Mission Waco's already existing empowerment model. There are opportunities and will be opportunities for what we call dignified income. Somebody's got to mow the yard, somebody's got to pick up trash or cigarette butts. I think it does change the nature of the person throwing trash on the ground when you know who's going to be picking it up for you. Those bathrooms are going to need to be cleaned, combined with a professional service as well. There's also all kinds of creative opportunities for dignified income. The church I came from in Austin just a few weeks ago hosted an art gallery sale, all from the art, from Community First, and they bought $19,000 worth of art from individuals from that community. Kendra Scott has a dedicated line that are all made by individuals that live out at Community First, and they're contract labor and paid. And rental rate, of course, is obviously based on which unit they choose to live in. So who qualifies at Creekside? The homeless, quote unquote, housing insecure, those who have been on the streets for more than 1 year in our county. These individuals have either stayed in a shelter, a motel, or have been camping out in tents. Next question, what will be the quality of construction? I think hopefully from the pictures that I've showed, you'll see that it's only going to be high-end construction materials that'll last and hold up to the elements for years to come. Now, why do some units not have plumbing? I think I addressed that a little bit. It does create half the cost, which then gets passed on to a much cheaper rental rate. But also, I think more importantly, it really provides us the opportunity to control the sanitary and cleanliness of these properties. What will security look like? Perimeter fencing, cameras, on-site personnel at all times, including 20% that are missionals that will be living there. Property management, residential care will also help be playing a part in keeping them in a safe environment. I think also it's not just about the safety of these individuals, it's also about the safety of the surrounding communities. There's a few different groups that we will be in close communication with. One, I think, is the immediate residents. While there's not that many, there's about 2 homes that are within 100 or so feet across the street from University Parks, and then a few more on 3rd Street that catty corners to it. So those are residents we want to be sensitive to in how we communicate, the narrative that we tell, and certainly how we interact with them, not just as the project starts, but even now. I think the ballpark next door, which is a state ballpark that's used just a couple times a year for tournaments, there'll be another partner that we will go into communication with as this project moves forward. I think the biggest partner and the biggest neighbor, the biggest organization, is Baylor University, and we've already started communicating with them about the project, timeline, plans, purpose, mission, all those things, and we believe that Baylor will be a good partner as well. I think that it'll produce less panhandling on and near campus as this population decreases. I think we both align with our Christian core values, and I think it's an excellent opportunity for volunteerism, academic internships, and apprenticeships as well. We already have an incredible relationship with Baylor, and I believe this community will only provide more opportunities to build a stronger partnership. Our leadership team that's been together for a while now is Jimmy Dorrell, Jay Jeffrey, Billy Davis, Dusty Kirk, Dr. Bill Lockhart, Lori Latimer, and myself. This is a preliminary construction budget, not necessarily for this property. This was for a property that was about 8 acres and included 96 units. We'll have over easily 25 to 30 acres to build on, and so you could see that there's significantly more opportunity than just 96 units. But I wanted to show you the sizable investment that we are wanting to make in our community on behalf of this population. We are taking this seriously. What we're building will be state-of-the-art. I believe it'll be something that our community will actually be proud of, and people will want to come and see and replicate, just as we have done with Community First in Austin. So that's my presentation. If you've got any questions, I'd love to see if I've got answers.
I've got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
On your fencing, where is that going to go?
It'll be perimeter fencing.
I know, but where? On what side?
Well, it'll be on the University Park side. It would be next to the berm. I don't know if you've been to this area. There's a really massive berm that separates this property and the ball fields, almost so much so that you can barely even see the tops of the floodlights from this property. It's a massive berm, so property fencing there. Certainly on down the road, we don't know what the backside, the riverside property, because I want us to be creative with that. But on the right side, we'll more than likely have perimeter fencing as well. And it'll be nice wrought iron fencing. I kind of look at Magnolia's, the way they've done their wrought iron fencing behind next to the railroad.
Yeah.
It's going to be high quality, and it's going to be high. I won't be able to jump over it, which that's not saying much. That's setting the bar pretty low. But still, we want to make sure it's actually secure and it's not just there to look good.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Tell me, and thank you for the presentation. When you said that you're looking to get in partnership or certainly communicate with your neighbors, do you know what that looks like?
You know, we've done this a lot recently with neighbors for recent rezone for our manor house. I mean, it's grassroots. It's knocking on a door and saying, can I walk over to this property with you? You know, I think we haven't quite been there yet because I don't have anything to show them. Once the architect schematics come back to us, we have a site plan, then we have something realistic to talk about. And I think some things to celebrate too. I think some buildings that will be very, very unique and will help answer maybe some of their security questions as well. And we'll also have a much better figure with a preliminary budget cost, and then which will lead to an operational expense cost for a budget as well. But if you've got any suggestions, you're the grassroots organizer, so please help me. But I think that's going to be important.
Man, this is an inspiring project, and I wish y'all well with this, and hopefully you'll be able to get the city support you need, but also the input for what's appropriate for this location. But man, I think this hopefully will be part of the solution, and we're grateful for y'all taking this on.
Thank you. And we're not here to ask for money tonight, but I won't be opposed if Mayor Meek wants to lock the doors and pass the plate to start our fundraising campaign. So, just kidding.
Yeah, I'll just chime in here that it really good presentation, John, and you have a heck of a team here with Dr. Durrell and Jay Jeffrey and Billy Davis, and you got some smart folks. I'll follow up with you on questions on just the mechanic and thesis of homeless versus affordable housing, and that kind of how the mechanic actually works and how that vets and everything. But I don't want to drag down the conversation here today. I'll follow up with you.
I'd love to visit with you about that.
Okay.
It's complex, for sure.
All I'll say to this is a great presentation. I think that, first of all, thank you all. Thank you all for what you do, for what you've done, for what you continue to do in the future. I think that there's no perfect location, but I think that this really hits a cool spot. I think it's a beautiful location. I think it's proximate to other city services, but at the same time, it's a bit isolated, and I think there's a lot of benefit for a lot of people from that, and that's just my opinion. I think you busted a bunch of the myths that I was going to have you try to bust, or some of the questions I had already, including who's the mix of who's there. You talked about the mixed income component. You talked about the fact that you would need to live here for over a year. What I'd say too is, as we do this, and John, you've heard me say this before, is I think that that this is a great project, but I would just encourage the city to be a good partner with you and other folks working on the chronically homeless, as well as affordable housing, to really come together and build out a strategic plan that comprehensively addresses all of these issues that affect people that find themselves in these circumstances, to make sure that we have behavioral health resources, to ensure that we're looking at that there will be people who do not choose to take advantages of the resources that will be offered in this community. And I think that we have to have a good strategy around that. And if there are people that are good people that aren't taking advantage of the resources in Creekside, I want to make sure that we have a compassionate response to that. If there are bad actors in the community who are engaging in criminal behaviors, homeless or otherwise, we have to hold people accountable so that we have the safe, prosperous city that we want. And so I think there has to be a comprehensive action plan that is a part of this, but I'm really excited about this and think that it's going to be a great project for our community. Any other questions? All right, thanks, John. Bradley, do you want to do the planning agenda, or do you want to do that in the meeting?
We actually have one more presentation, Mayor.
Sorry, it's just not on my outline. I knew that we'd...
Oh, okay.
Homework?
There is one more.
Oh, that's right. It is in my outline, actually.
I think it's like a 10-minute to 15-minute presentation. Is that correct, Galen?
Yes.
Is that about right? So it's your pleasure, council. We could do this presentation during public hearings later. We can press on now.
Let's do it now. I think we do it.
All right. Well, Galen, why don't you introduce this one real briefly? It's work session 164.
Okay, today you'll hear from Daniel Giroux and Baron Bell, excuse me, from Baker Tilly, presenting a draft allocation plan for the Home Investment Partnerships Program, American Rescue Plan Act funding to be submitted to HUD. This plan will identify strategies that will assist in the creation of projects and/or activities to strengthen the community. The goal is to develop a comprehensive plan focused on assistance to qualifying populations, which include homeless or those at risk of becoming homeless, and supportive services. There is a public hearing and a resolution for your consideration on tonight's agenda in regard to this plan. This plan must be submitted to HUD by March 31st of 2023.
Thank you, Galen. Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure being here. We've had a great time working with Galen and his team over the past few months, so it was good to meet him and also Josh today. But what we're going to do is walk through and give you an overview of what Home and Home ARP is, the allocation plan that was completed for the City of Waco, and the allocation of funding and how that funding will be spent, and then we'll entertain any questions that you might have. I'm Daniel, and this is Baron. By the way, I'm with Baker Tilly. Baron, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Baron Bell with Community Development Experts, working with Baker Tilly on this endeavor, so thanks for having us.
So first, just an overview of Home ARP. The Home Investment Partnership Program is a program allocated and run by HUD, and the allocation for Home is made to participating jurisdictions all across the United States every year. Home ARP, of course, came out of the American Rescue Plan Act, which was an allocation of $5 billion across the U.S. to participating jurisdictions, those same participating jurisdictions that accept home funding annually. The home funding, or Home ARP allocation funding for Waco out of that $5 billion was $2,539,867. That was just based off the HUD formula. And this is a one-time funding, so we did keep that in mind as we move through and help the city determine the allocation of funding for the plan. Home ARP funds can provide funding to a particular group of to particular population groups. as well as fund eligible activities. So those population groups include those people that are homeless, those that are at risk of homelessness, those fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, and these all of these include their population's families as well. Other populations we're providing supportive services or assistance would prevent the family's homelessness, and then veterans and families that include a veteran that meets one of those criteria. And eligible activities, what the funding can be spent on. The production or preservation of affordable housing, tenant-based rental assistance, also known as TBRA, supportive services, we'll go through those in a moment, and then the purchase and development of non-congregate shelter. Baron?
Okay, so on this slide here, we talk about the definition of the population group, so everybody has an understanding of who's being served specifically. So what this slide does not show is the first qualifying population, which we mentioned are persons who are homeless, which meaning that they live in a shelter or transitional housing, which is only for a 24-month period, where they're living in a place not fit for a human habitation. And then we have those who are at risk of homelessness. So to be at risk of homelessness, the first criterion is that their incomes for at risk of homelessness is 30% and below the median area income, which HUD programs calls this population group extremely low income. So as an example, for a one-person family in the Waco metropolitan area, median income is $49,000. And you compare that to a one-person household, that's $14,700. So you have a real calculation of the gap between a median income family and an extremely low income family. $69,833, that's the median income for a four-person family. Extremely low income or at risk of homelessness is an annual income of $27,550. And in addition to the income level, then we have these other criterions. One, resources. These are households where they have insufficient resources immediately available to attain housing stability, and then they have to have one of these other conditions, that have moved frequently because of economic reason, living in the home of another because of economic hardship, and you see the others there. Now, there's also another qualifying population, which is greatest risk of housing instability, greatest risk of housing instability. It differs slightly with at risk of homelessness in that persons who are at greatest risk of housing instability are those who are extremely low income. We have the incomes there, but they also experience severe cost burden. Severe cost burden means that they're paying more than 50% of their monthly income towards housing costs. More than 50% of their monthly income towards housing costs. And then if their incomes are higher at 50% of median area income, and then they also have one of these conditions B through C, they're also at greatest risk of housing instability. So this grant, these funds is not just for homeless or persons who are at greater risk or at risk of homelessness, but it's also for persons who are at greater risk of housing instability, which are very low income renters. They have housing, but they're still at greater risk of housing instability.
Eligible activities and supportive services is also a line item that the allocation can fund. So all those included here, from case management and child care and education services to transportation, healthcare, outreach, and legal services. Those were all taken into account when making these decisions. And when we say taken into account, we took a broad variety of stakeholder feedback and citizen feedback, which we'll go over in a moment, to help determine this allocation as described by the plan. So speaking of the allocation plan, what we've been working to put together is an allocation plan to describe their proposed activities, basically designate what the funding would be spent on, particularly for those subsets that we talked about earlier, whether it was non-congregate shelter or affordable housing with those eligible populations. I wanted to make this clear that to receive the balance of the home ARP funds after receiving 5% of the participating jurisdiction's allocation, so Waco is a participating jurisdiction, you've already received the 5% of the allocation to help pay for consulting services to carry out the plan. The plan then has to be submitted to HUD by March 31st, so 10 days for review and acceptance. And once HUD accepts that, the rest of the funding will be, trickled down from HUD to the city. Home ARP allocation plan requirements, what we've been doing to put this plan together, we went through a consultation and public participation process with both local stakeholders as well as citizens. Through the stakeholder process, we had 3 focus group meetings, and then public participation, we carried out a public participation survey in a digital format. Completed a needs assessment and gap analysis, described home ARP activities and production housing goals from the funding, selected preferences, and as well as determined that home ARP refinancing guidelines did not need to be designated simply because the allocation was not going to be used toward the refinancing of affordable housing. So consultation feedback, this is information from the stakeholder meetings that were held on January 5th, 9th, and 11th of this year. A total of 32 agencies were invited to participate. 20 individuals representing 14 of those agencies participated. And they noted that the greatest area of need identified for home ARP funds is the production and preservation of new affordable rental housing, and specifically transitional housing with some supportive services. Also of note was non-congregate shelter and supportive services for tenants, including life skills training was noted, rent and utility assistance was discussed, and mental health was heavily discussed as well. With public participation feedback, surveys were made available in English and Spanish, and 168 responses were received. So this chart notes that 38.7% of residents identified the construction of new affordable rental housing units as their highest priority. This looks a little confusing. So this is a ranked choice vote. So 38.7% of the respondents chose that construction. And you can kind of see across the board, no matter what choice that came in, that choice was higher than the others. And then when asked about the single greatest housing need in the community, 58% of respondents identified affordable rental housing units, and then 37% noted transitional housing with supportive services, and then 5% said non-congregate emergency shelter. And then when asked what respondents believe to be the most needed service for individuals that are homeless or at risk of homelessness, 71 identified mental health services. So, far and beyond the others. Also of note, employment-related services, and then transportation. 23 said other. A lot of respondents, when we said other, they would say all of the above. They would go back to items that were more tangible, not necessarily services, but they would go back to housing. Other, items mentioned were an increase in wages, more jobs, education services, which all kind of fell back into the services pool. Some people just wanted to make their voices heard there when they had the opportunity. And I'm going to pass it to Baron for this one.
Okay, so in addition to the data that we gather, or the consultation and input that we gather from stakeholders and experts in the field, in the profession, we also take data so that we can match the two together to see how what the experts are saying actually shows that is addressing the true impact. So here we have a chart that gives us our point-in-time homelessness, called a point-in-time survey, which is a survey that's done throughout the nation for the continuum of care for homelessness in the month of January each year. So these counts here, sometimes they are underreport the expanse of homelessness. However, by doing the count in January, persons who are in shelters or unsheltered in the month of January generally are individuals who are at extreme need and they don't have any other supports. Therefore, they're in the elements most likely. So to the left of the column, we have the shelters or the inventory of services that are available on January 1st. So the takeaways with this particular chart here is that in the Waco area, we have 5 family units with 64 beds, meaning for families, we have a lot of individuals, or a lot of families rather, that don't have complete independent non-congregate housing units, but they're sharing beds in a lot of instances in an open space. We have for emergency shelter 87 beds that were available for adults. In our transitional housing, that's persons that live in a location for no more than 24 months or a 2-year period. We have more units there, 20 units and 77 beds. And then for adults only, we had 33 transitional housing units. Then in our permanent supportive housing, these are individuals that are on some program to assist them in their own apartment unit with certain supports. What we see, we have only 9 units available for family, 25 beds, 84 beds available for adults. And the thing to understand here about our permanent supportive housing is that we have 53 veteran beds of the 84 permanent supportive units. So what we saw is that in this particular area, the veterans receive a lot of the services for permanent housing and transition to stable housing. Now, in the middle of the chart, we have the homeless population on the point-in-time survey. So the sheltered homeless families, 22 households. That's not persons. That's 22 families or households, if you will. And one thing that we were pleased to see is that the unsheltered homeless families was 0 on the point-in-time survey. The majority of our homeless were adults. We had 45 sheltered adults, and then we had 75 unsheltered homeless adults, which is interesting because the availability of emergency and transitional housing beds was 120 beds. And we had 87 emergency shelter beds, but only 45 sheltered homeless. So there seems to be a combination that beds are available, but maybe there's something that doesn't quite suit or fit the individuals who were still homeless on that point in time survey. So we had to take that into consideration. And then we have victims of domestic violence, which is also a qualifying population. 12 were sheltered, 12 households or families were sheltered, and then 5 were enumerated that were unsheltered on the point in time survey. Then to the right, all the way at the bottom, we have the gap analysis. This gap analysis is not just simple math, but we take a look at the inventory on the point-in-time survey. We take a look at service providers, what they say is needed in an inventory. And the City of Waco and the Heart of Texas Homeless Coalition recently produced a study, Strategic Plan for Ending Homelessness. And that study identified that there were gaps in permanent housing units. And it also identified that a desperate gap was that there were not enough family beds. So Sally's House, operated by the Salvation Army, was the lone emergency shelter within the Waco area that offered shelter to families. So based upon this information, we came up with the gap analysis of 50 additional family beds and 20 units, and then 10 adult-only beds, because this point-in-time survey showed that on any given night, we do have beds available for adults who are homeless, but we realize there's something there that all of those beds are not being occupied, at least on the point-in-time survey. Now, this next slide is going to show greatest risk of housing instability. And HUD produces special data tabulations for communities in order to come up with these data and statistics. So this is more of a direct calculation from the data that's available. So essentially there's 29,000 rental units available in the Waco metropolitan area, and of those units, approximately 1,600 of those units were available at rents that persons who are extremely low income could afford. In that other category of very low income, 5,420 units were available that persons could afford. If we go down to the middle level of need, we had 5,355 extremely low income households who also had severe housing problems. So severe housing problem is 50% or more housing costs a month going towards your housing costs, and also you have more than 1.5 persons per room in that house that's overcrowding, and also lacking complete plumbing and kitchen facilities. So we had 5,355 extremely low income households experience some cost burden, severe cost burden, but only 1,645 units. For those at very low income, that 30% to 50%, this particular data set showed that of the 1,935 households that had severe cost burden at those income levels, there were 5,420 units. So we estimate that 3,700 units are needed in the inventory for persons at greater risk of housing instability. So this is not for homelessness, this is individuals who can rent, but at lower incomes.
So based on that data, from HUD, the hard data, based on the data from local organizations, from stakeholders, and from the community. This is the allocation plan and the allocation of funding, and we'll flip to the next slide in a moment to make it a little more clear. So for acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter, $500,000 will be allocated to that line item, so 20%. For the development of affordable rental housing, 1.6 million, almost 1.7 million, 65% of the grant will be allocated to that, so development of affordable rental housing. And then 380,980 up to 15%, which is the maximum from the federal government and HUD, will be allocated to administration and planning for a total of the $2.5 million. With the 1.658 million being made available for the development of affordable housing, it's estimated that 15 to 20 housing units will be made available to veterans through this grant, and additionally it's estimated that additional 10 to 15 units will be made available to households at risk of homelessness and at greatest risk of housing instability. For the amount of $500,000 for the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter, it's estimated that 4 units and 8 to 10 beds will be made available.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that intention for our homeless and at-risk veterans, especially given certain projects that are in the works and the VA investment in our community. I really appreciate that. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and briefly before we mention the limitations on the note that we're at right now. So in terms of the administration, this is a one-time fund. Again, the monies need to be expended by 2030, September 30th, 2030. And these projects have to be monitored under the ARP program for a period of 15 years. So just to note that in terms of the allocation for administration. Now, on this slide here, we show limitations. The Home ARP grant allows communities to have limitations of qualifying populations for housing. And so what we did include in this particular plan, we have a limit for some of the units, up to 10 to 15 units for veterans. What helped us arrive at that particular decision is that the Dory Miller VA Hospital is the only hospital within the Central Texas VA region that actually has a mental health or a psychiatric hospital right there on site. And so we understood in our consultation that there's an opportunity to build and develop housing units right there at the hospital where individuals can receive the necessary, veterans can receive the necessary supportive services. Success of this particular project would also free up some of the other units because veterans are using a lot of the permanent housing and supportive vouchers in the area. So this Dory Miller project is an opportunity to serve veterans, provide services right there on site, and also free up some of the resources for other population groups. And we also can do preferences in the plan. So a preference is not a limit, of course, but it's first time of ranking. And so we're also doing a preference in this particular plan for persons with families and children to receive affordable housing opportunities and sheltered opportunities.
These are just important dates. So today, obviously, the deadline for submission to HUD is March 31st, so we will need action, of course. But we'll continue to work with Galen and his team if you need help with the submission of this after approval. But we would be glad to take any questions that you might have and discuss the project.
Holmes here, I agree with your allocation and support it all, but would you go back to page point in time homelessness? I just want to understand the math here. Mm-hmm. And you said, but you qualified that it's not linear math, but where I take the current inventory of family units, if you add all those up, it's 59 units, 221 beds. And then we have 22 family head of households in the population. How do we, I'm trying to follow why the gap is 50. Why, is that the right math
Yes.
to look at?
So again, this particular chart is not math per se, because its only point in time is really not reflecting what could be the situation for an entire year. And so we looked at other data also. And I mentioned the strategic plan for ending homelessness that was done by the city, and the Texas Homeless Coalition did find that there are not enough units or beds for families in general for, you know, an entire period. So that's how we came up with that number. So yes, that's not a mathematical reflection of the data that you see in the point-in-time survey.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
That's all I had.
Any other questions? Guys, this is a great presentation. We're really excited about this. We really thank you for your partnership on this really critical work. This is one of the most important things that you can be doing for our community, and it's really great work. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Your agenda items? If not, we'll recess the work session and reconvene regular session for executive session as read into the record by the city secretary at 5:40 p.m.
Notice is hereby given that the City Council will go into executive session in accordance to the following provisions: Real Property, Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.072, and Economic Development, Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.087. We are now in executive session.